I don't do a ton of like combo reviews, but both of these I found to be really fascinating and have some kind of similar feel and ideas to them. And so I figured, you know what, I'm going to end up comparing them and talking about them together anyway. So let's talk about both. Hello and welcome to my channel. In this video, we are going to be talking about both I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Hartman and The Wall by Marlon Haushofer. And these are two kind of like they're novel, they're kind of shorter books that both explore some unique types of ideas and themes, both largely centering around like a woman alone, but they go from two extremely different angles and have some pretty different outcomes in some ways. But I thought both were definitely worth talking about, and I found both fascinating. I did end up liking I Who Have Never Known Men more on its own, and that was like a 5 star on the wall, a 4 star for me, although I think both had a lot of strengths. So let's talk about them, and I'm going to end up comparing them a little bit too. So I'll introduce both, and then we'll get into some details a little bit more so. Starting with I Have Never Known Men. This is taking place completely at the start here in a bunker, and it's this girl who doesn't remember anything before the bunker. She's in a bunker with 39 other women. None of them really have a whole lot of idea of why they're there. Their memories are foggy of what led up to this, but all of these other women have memories of life before and what things were like there. And this girl who's very young, she doesn't know anything other than just what is here in the bunker. And so it's a sort of like weird coming of age type of story in a way, except through a completely different lens because most of the elements that you would normally see aren't there. And we're seeing this character who's going through and trying to figure out, and the title here, I Have Never Known Men, she puts a lot of importance into that. She thinks that it must be like this kind of defining thing here, because all of the other women have and she hasn't. And instead of that really being the focus, which I've seen some reviews that say they think it's too male focused, which I didn't get it that way. There is something in there that I totally get, that it went on a bit long for my taste with an element there that was sort of focused on a male who's there as a guard, but really it's more so about all of the internal type of feelings and things that this character is going through and just trying to figure out life as they go on. And so I found it really fascinating. There are times where it gets quite dark. There are times where it's just haunting, and there are some lines in there that just the way they're delivered. This was just something that was such a almost surreal experience going through. I ended up doing the whole thing in pretty much one go because I just was absorbed in. So this worked really well for me. I know it's been kind of hit or miss for others, but I quite enjoyed the experience of that. It was just something totally different. I know we have The Wall by Marla Haushofer, and this one is sort of similar, but on the other end of the spectrum here, because this is a woman who is a little bit older, has lived a life, and very much so, and she's staying at a cabin that belongs to her sister's husband, and something happens, and there's an invisible wall around the area, and she is all alone except for some animals, which does include a cow, which features pretty prominently. And it's her kind of going through and figuring out how to survive. And instead of having like the other people around, but still having it be a very singular story, she is truly alone except for the animals to start. The animals do play in as very much being characters as well, which I find to be extremely interesting as well. But the idea here of her being alone as well, it's the complete polar opposite of the spectrum because she knows what life has been before. And so she has times that thinks about like, oh, if somebody else was here, would it even be a good thing, even though she's very alone and lonely? But her kind of mindset and the way that she's going through this type of story, I find to be really interesting as well. It's super different because it's both are dealing with isolation, and both are dealing with female characters who are having a lot of just internal dialogue and exploring these types of things. But it's her like thoughts about what might have happened and the way that she reacts are just quite different. Now, the thing that brought this down a little bit for me is this did, while it was still engaging and I did enjoy the whole thing, it had some parts that just felt kind of slow and a little bit more on the boring side, because of the fact that we're just doing sort of mundane things. I think it makes sense. And again, like I totally understand, and it's not really a critique of the story. It's just, it does make it a little bit slower. But also, I don't know if you'd have the same level of impact if you did take some of those things out, because part of the story really is just, she's trying to go through, do normal things, scavenge, find things, and just all of her mundane things. And that's what it is. And she's writing it down almost just as a way to, cope with the aloneness here, and go through it that way. And so it's not like it's meant to be a super exciting story, but it's more of just this exploration here. So that's kind of the start with thoughts on the two of these books. Now, one thing I will note is both of these are the type of sci-fi thing where you're never going to really get answers on what happened or get explanation on what's going on. That's part of the just the feel and the style. And I've read some other things like that, and sometimes I struggle where you don't get any sort of explanation as to what the premise is. But it's also something I've seen with some older sci-fi will be like, hey, here's the premise. We're not going to tell you how it happened or why, but here's the premise. But I think both do a really good job of having that be such a important part of the story that you don't have to be left necessarily to actually try to think of a logical explanation, because ultimately it just doesn't matter, because that's what's real for these characters. That's what they're dealing with, and they're also dealing with not knowing necessarily what's happened to put them in the situation that they're in. And it really adds something, I think, to me. And they both approach it a little bit differently as well. With you never really get full answers, but with how the characters approach it, what their ideas are, and their sort of reactions, I think, are also quite different, and also speak to the different stories. And this is where I'm going to get a little bit spoilery to talk a bit, because I want to delve in just a little bit deeper to both of these and talk about some of my thoughts here. So I will timestamp, so that if you want to skip for both or either, you can do so. We're going to start with I Who Have Never Known Men first, and talk some spoilers here as well. So starting here with I Who Have Never Known Men. In the book, we spend quite a lot of time in the bunker, but then something happens and the women are able to escape. The guards run off. There's an alarm, and they never find out what happened, and they never really find out what was going on to have them here either. And they spend the rest of their lives essentially exploring, looking for other people and never finding them. And the way it's written too, with the main character, and you get flashes early on where this, it's kind of where it's going with that isolation, and that's even the parts where we're there and there's others around. She's a very isolated character because she doesn't feel she's the same. But her going through, slowly watching everybody die and becoming the character that actually has to kill them, and in some ways, because her emotional connections are very stunted, for her as well, so she doesn't see it quite as what it is, and the sacrifice and or kindness that it is. But there was some really like just heartbreaking moments there, but just sort of the haunting isolation of her searching and losing everyone and not thinking she's ever really going to find anything. And it really does just play into the idea of the isolation. Is you're in such a wide open space. You start in the bunker feeling very isolated, but then you go to a wide open space and it's those same levels of isolation. And the way that it is explored in vastly different ways throughout, I thought was extremely well done and was fascinating. And while the character does presume that they don't think they are on Earth, they think this must be something else, even though they can't figure out what on Earth it would be, or what not on Earth it would be, is sort of the setup there. And it again, I think it's so different from the Wall, because jumping into the Wall spoilers here now. In the Wall, you have this invisible wall, and immediately the character there is like thinking about ways maybe they could try to get past it. they predict that maybe they could dig under it because the stream seems to eventually be able to get through, but they never try. And at first I was a little bit frustrated. I'm like, why would you not even try to get through? And it actually is addressed in the book, and I think a very satisfying way, because eventually you start to see that the character, they've thought about it, and they keep it in the back of their mind, essentially, that at some point, when I'm done, when I'm tired, i'm going to I'm going to go and get a pathway out, and so that everybody will be able to escape and it'll be fine. But they also know that if it doesn't work, and they will no longer have that hope, they don't think they'll be able to keep going on, essentially. And so it's the excuse to not try, to not do it, to put it off, because that's the one thing that's like going for them. And so it's dealing with that isolation with the animals, and the animals are almost personified, and they do feel like true characters, even though they very much are regular animals because of this. So I thought that, again, it was very poignant the way it was done, because immediately my thoughts are just like, you're not even going to try and get out. And like there was teasers like, oh, I don't know if I'd be strong enough to dig or something. And I'm like, you could do it. So like there's lots of reasons. And so it went from being something that kind of frustrated me a little bit to being such a powerful moment in the story, where you really realize that that's why they just can't bring themselves to do it, because they have to have that to hold on to. Also, it does something which feels very much sort of like it comes out of nowhere, but also I think plays into the feelings of isolation, and with this character feeling really like, gosh, it would almost be worse if there was a man here, because then I'd be expected to be the woman. I'd be expected to wait on them, to do this, to do that, and have that role. Whereas in the pure isolation, even though she's lonely, it's also just she's just a person, and you kind of lose the idea of those roles, and it comes across it really, really differently. And then you see the other side, because apparently there is a man who has been here, probably presumably all along, who's been doing much, much worse. You have kind of the idea that there's been nobody to take care of him, and so he said to fend for himself and not done well, who comes across, sees the fact that there's this well-kept place, there's livestock and everything, and just goes and commits incredible violence and kills the bull, just because they want to be violent and do it. And it's that kind of chaotic thing, and it feels like it comes out of nowhere, and yet when you really sort of take it in the context, it fits so much, especially with the particular character and the particular style of viewpoint that we're coming here. And it's this woman who's just kind of felt like she's been really much in her role as a woman, what was expected of her in the time period, what she was to do. And it comes to be able to survive on her own with their animals, do all this thing, and then have men just come charging in and just destroy everything in a careless moment, because they're not thinking, not caring. And it just sort of, it fits in, I think, really well overall with kind of thematically what's being explored there. And again, super different ways in both of these books, but just a very compelling, both in their own way. And that's kind of the big thing here, is there are some similar things going on thematically, but from different sides. But I just found both of these stories just super, super compelling. It's the kind of reads that both of them were somewhat of an experience. And maybe if I would have read them in the opposite order, I would have been leaning more toward The Wall than I Who've Never Known Men. Uh, Really, though, I think I Who Have Never Known Men, for whatever reason, the writing style there, and just the way that it flowed, even in the parts that were, again, there was definitely some things that went on a bit long for me in that one too. And yet it's still just, I don't know, something about that was just this very ominous, haunting kind of style of narration, because you were having some kind of flash forwards to what was to come. And The Wall was just more the day-to-day monotony kind of thing, is what you were getting there, in a very effective way as well. And so it was more of just a stylistic preference. But I think these are both really fascinating reads, just seeing really different viewpoints and the perspectives of women, completely outside of the ideas, viewpoints of men or male characters in any way. And that's kind of what we're both here at the core. We're exploring the ideas of what makes a woman, what makes a girl, and the ideas of what if we have these people on their own, there's nobody else, the isolation, what then are you? What really makes you who you are? And it's explored in two different ways by these two different authors, I think just done so very well. So these are both quite short. I definitely recommend checking them out. Not everybody's probably gonna jive with them because I think both of these are probably gonna be a little bit hit or miss. But for me, they were very much hit. I enjoyed both. They were just a really cool experience, and I think reading them close together as well I found really interesting, just because there were a lot of parallels despite them being quite different. That just made me think more about the each respective one based on the other. So yeah, definitely recommend these checking out if you're looking for something different. I just these are still, they've really stuck with me. They both really have stuck with me, even though they're neither one is kind of my normal kind of read by any means, because they're sci-fi and they're very unique sci-fi, and I tend to do a little bit more on the fantasy side, but definitely ones that I think are worth checking out just to experience. Even if it doesn't end up being a win for you, it's I think worth a check out. So those are my thoughts on I Who Have Never Known Men and The Wall. Let me know if you've read one or both of these. Would love to hear your thoughts, because these were really just fun to talk about and to explore and think about as well. So would love to hear from you in the comments. Make sure to give the video a like if you enjoyed it. Check the links in the description as always for the Patreon if you want to support what I do, as well as the Wizardly Enclave Discord if you want to chat books, whether these books, other books, really anything at all. It's a lot of fun. I would love to have you. And of course, if you enjoy my content, make sure to subscribe.